It's only been like 5, 6 games into the season, but man, has Kaiden Guhle ever shown up. This guy has been making headlines for the Canadiens since the time he stepped on the ice this year. I would have to say that he's by far one of the most seasoned prospects to go into the NHL right now, as we can see by his impact on this Montreal Canadiens team. For those who may not know who Guhle is, let's just talk about his story, I guess, for a sec. He was picked 15th overall during the 2020 NHL draft, so taken by the Canadiens when Marc Bergevin was a sheriff in town. And then obviously, Bergevin, he got fired, so we had Ken Hughes replace him. And then Hughes just kind of inherited Goulet into the lineup. He kind of just took him in and threw him into the Canadiens lineup. And not only is Goulet a first-round draft pick, but he's a really, really young guy. He's only 20 years old, which means he has a lot to offer for years to come if he stays in Montreal. An even better thing is that he has great size at 6'2". He's 205 pounds, which would make someone like Ken Hughes obviously really happy considering the defensive style that he has wanted in his defenseman for some time now. And Guhle is currently being paired with veteran David Savard and has already made a profound impact by averaging over 20 minutes of ice time in the first few games of the season so far, most of which are at even strength, placing him in the top 5 of average ice time on the Canadiens. What's really strange is how Guhle was being constantly neglected by scouts, as there were players not as skilled as him climbing above him in the rankings. Most had him around the 13th to 19th range of being selected, but nonetheless, now that the Canadiens have him, they have a guy who's a physical defenseman. Not a guy who can put the puck past the net every night, but certainly by being a playmaker and a good defensive defenseman. This is what has really impressed Hughes and head coach Marty St. Louis so far. He's got great defensive play, he's got great hockey IQ, and that he can read the offense perfectly, which is pretty much what we're going to be discussing today. And what's really surprising to me is that no team actually thought about drafting him after he was lights out in juniors with the Prince Albert Raiders. I mean, there was one year he had 60 plus points with them, which is obviously crazy, and it's even crazier to think that that season came 1 year before getting drafted. It's just a great story to hear about him and his journey from junior to the NHL. So I think we can all agree that, this guy, he's for sure exceeded everyone's expectations so far. There were many people skeptical of him playing in the top 4 role he was predicted to be in, but he's come to Montreal with a high level of confidence, a controlled game, and a tranquil mindset. His ability to break up the opposition and putting up points simultaneously just increases his value, but then his skill were put to the real test when he faced some of the best players in the entire league, in guys like Mitch Marner and Austin Matthews when they played the Leafs. When they played the Caps, they were up against OVECHKIN. Against the Pens, they're up against CROSBY, Malkin. So Guhle has had 3 data points of playing against elite players where he has had to prove his ability to shut them down. Remember how this is a 20-year-old defenseman averaging 20 minutes a night and having played 4 former Hart Trophy winners. That's a great way to gain experience right off the bat. I mean, he's playing the best of the best in CROSBY, Matthews, Ovechkin, and so on as a rookie player only playing 5 games in his entire NHL career. And then head coach Marty St. Louis was actually asked by an interviewer about what his thoughts were on Goulet's performance versus those guys, and he said he was pretty impressed and proud of how Guhle has risen up to the expectation of playing like a true top 4 defenseman and how he's handled the role very well so far. St. Louis also anticipates that Guhle continues to play well because as of previous evidence, we know how the Montreal Canadiens and defensemen go. They play around 20 games, and then they get an injury that takes them out for a long period of time. As of now, Joel Edmondson and Mike Matheson are injured and aren't playing, which pretty much indicates how throughout the entire season we will be seeing injury plaguing players, especially veteran players, and how adjusting to them for the young guys is super important. That means that the Canadiens will rely on guys like Arber Xhekaj and Kaiden Guhle to perform to the level they are being tasked with. I actually watched a bit of the Leafs and Canadiens game and saw some parts of Matthews taking on Guhle, and Matthews was getting destroyed by this guy. I mean, every single time Matthews brought the puck to the defensive side, it would just be poked away by Guhle, which is pretty surprising to see a rookie take on the guy who just won the Hart like that. It obviously frustrated Matthews as he couldn't control the puck, but Goulet's defensive play certainly gave confidence to the entire Habs management and their entire coaching staff. The same thing happened with the game against the Pittsburgh Penguins when Crosby was trying to get the offense going, but every single time Guhle was there, his line could not get anything going. Another really cool thing I noticed about him was his size, which I mentioned briefly earlier. He's 205 pounds and 6'2", which reminded me of a former Hab and actually former captain himself, Shea Weber. He very, very well may be the next up-and-coming Shea Weber of this team. The Habs have had tons of physical defensemen throughout the years. They had PK Subban, who they replaced for Shea Weber in that trade. They had Ben Sherratt. They have Arber Xhekaj now. They also have Joel Edmondson right now. All of these guys are heavy physical defensemen who can throw hits that send people flying. And they weren't the fastest guys on the ice for sure, but if you got in the way of one of them, what came next was not going to be very pleasant. And I feel like Kaiden Guhle is already becoming one of those type of guys just based on 4 or 5 games of watching him. There have been other comparisons to players outside of the Canadiens and guys like Victor Hedman, but I don't want to get into that too much because comparing any defenseman to Victor Hedman has to have some value and some logic, as this guy Guhle has only played like 5 games, so that would just be purely absurd. Now Guhle, he's not some 90-point machine type of defenseman, but look at the confidence this kid gives Marty St. Louis and company. If he wants Guhle on that penalty kill against Toronto, a team with the #1 power play unit in the entire league last year, and he succeeds, what confidence would that bring St. Louis, and what confidence would that bring Guhle? I mean, just wow. That's exactly what happened versus the Toronto Maple Leafs, where this kid was put on the penalty kill against Matthews, against Marner, against Tavares Nylander, and he did super well. His performance should certainly light a fire under other young players or rookies on the Canadiens or in the NHL that, look, this kid is 20 years old, playing his 5th NHL game or something, and he's giving Austin Matthews or Sidney Crosby a run for their own money. That's confidence and pure skill and hockey IQ of a young player like that to do these type of things. Again, this is a young and growing Habs team with minimal experience. They will need to rely on veterans to demonstrate and be role models, but what if those veterans are injured? Then what happens? Guys like Guhle will probably come into the picture. We could easily see him just playing at a high level to instill confidence into his teammates and fellow defensemen. Specifically for the Habs, their defense has a lot of holes. It started with Sherratt getting traded to the Florida Panthers during the deadline, then Shea Weber retired, and then Jeff Petrie got traded, and then Romanov got traded, and then Mike Matheson, the guy they got in return for Petrie, he's now injured, Edmondson is injured, and the list just keeps growing and growing. And if Guhle just rises out of nowhere, that could mean good news for the Habs. This team needs their veterans back, which they already have, they just need them to get healthy. They already have their Arbor Xhekaj as Ben Sherratt 2.0. They need a power play quarterback desperately, as this is something they haven't had in a really long time. Shea Weber had to play that role, but they really haven't had a definitive guy like that since the days of Andrei Markov or PK Subban, so it's clearly been a really long time. So the plan for now should be to remain patient. The Habs are being competitive in the standings, which is pretty cool for a team that was supposed to be in rebuild mode, even though they're last in the standings. One win would shift them like 3 spots up the standings, so in all they aren't struggling. They are simultaneously developing players in guys like Jen Mysak and Logan Mailloux, so this team will continue to have great defense in the future. Either way, let me know in the comments what you guys think about Kaiden Guhle and his performances versus the stars of the league. Thank you guys for tuning in, and have a wonderful day.